welcome you to our quarterly Community of Practice event this morning. I'm joined by my director and the acting director of the innovation portfolio here at GSA, Kelly Olson. And we both like to welcome you this morning. Kelly, a few words?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for being here in the room. Thank you for being online. I know, especially in light of this week's events, a lot of people were called away and there's a lot going on. So really, thank you for coming together to collaborate and share the great work that you're doing here with all of us today. I don't have a ton of program updates, which is great news. We can jump right into the program. Here, I just want to call your attention to page 2 of the agenda that you all have in the room and just point out some upcoming training and events that we are having for the community. We're having an informal networking session on Tuesday, September 19th from 3 to 6. And we'll send out a follow-up email with these details for folks that are online as well. And then we're also hosting Challenge.gov program open office hours on Tuesday, September 26th from 1 to 2 o'clock. So those of you that have questions or just curious or want to just chat with the program team, they'll be available from 1 to 2 on the 26th. And that's about it. So thank you again for being here, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Thanks. So just a couple of housekeeping items for those of you in the room. If you're looking for a restroom, they're right across the hall. Women's room is right across the hall. The men's room is right around the corner. We're right here at the first wing, so the closest elevator is just right out here down the hall if you need it. And I'll give you more information about the building and where you can go for a quick snack, coffee, or a bottle of water on our break. But with no further ado, I would like to invite our first presenters up. So Mike Arendt and Ryan Novak both are with the MITRE Corporation. We were fortunate enough to have them join us in July of last year to talk about what was then a draft white paper they were developing in partnership with the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. Since then, that draft has become a document which has been released, and a lot of folks are interested in looking at it and learning more about challenge-based acquisition. So I'm going to turn it over to you, gentlemen. And if one of you would like to step over here, you can.
All right, well, good morning, everyone. I'm Ryan Novak. Quick background, former Air Force contracting officer, got out, we're a small company now. I've been at MITRE for about 9 years, supported the Navy, Air Force, Army, GSA, DOD, and civilian agencies. And sort of my passion over the last couple of years that MITRE affords me the opportunity to do is to support what we call our sponsors or clients, but also to in some internally funded research projects, if you will, and one of them being challenge-based acquisition. We started this up, I don't even know, what, 4 or 5 years ago, and it really was sort of the brainchild of a roboticist that did the grand challenge with DARPA, and you build a robotic vehicle, had nothing to do with acquisition, and afterwards said, man, this is pretty cool stuff. We get a lot of innovation here. How can we do this and actually buy something at the end of it? So that's sort of my background. That's my passion. Mike, you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Mike Arendt. I've been at MITRE for going on 5 years. Before that, I was at IBM in their innovation group. Before that, I was at the University of Maryland getting a PhD in public policy.
And I'm assuming this is more for capturing, not so. Okay. Okay, next slide, please. So just real quick, what we're going to talk about today, I'm going to go over the challenge-based acquisition piece and turn it over to Mike, who's going to transition into other transaction authority, consortiums, and a case study example for the C5 consortium. And then sort of at the end, we'll wrap it up with questions. Ask us questions throughout. And if you want to follow up with us too, our emails are there. Like I said, this is our passion. So shoot us emails, call us up, whatever you need. And then at the end, we'll just give you sort of a update where we're at with challenge-based acquisition. What's the next thing? Next slide. So before we start, I think this is a good, you've probably seen this quote out of the FAR, Federal Acquisition Regulations, but the bottom line is it's critical, right? If you're going to do a challenge-based acquisition or an incentive and prize challenge or some type of innovation is a buzzword, right now in the government. It's the buzzword in acquisition too. You have to have the right mindset, right? The glass is half full, not half empty. As a contracting officer, I was always one of the guys that said, we can make this happen. Maybe not this way, but we can do it this way. And I think people need to be exposed. It's somewhat of a risk-averse environment with the contracting shops and acquisition shops, as in some ways it should be. At the same time, the federal acquisition regulations really allow for innovation. I mean, this is in the first chapter of the FAR. So getting the right team and getting the right mindset. We've worked on a couple of these, Mike and I, and we've seen success and we've seen failure. And the successful one was when we literally brought everyone to the table in a room like this, and we had senior leadership, we had contracting officer, contract specialist, engineer, program manager, and we said, hey, this is what we want to do, and attorney, general counsel, right? I mean, that's should not fail to mention that person. Everyone in that room, and said, this is what we're looking at doing, questions, problems, what can we work through together? And we, as a team, we came together and pushed the same way. We've also seen failure where we worked for a specific agency with the program shop and weren't allowed to talk to the contracting officer for 60 days. So we were essentially developing strategy, not behind the contracting officers. In fact, they didn't want to talk to us, but after 60 days, we went in here and said, we want to do this. And the contracting officer said, I don't do that. So it's getting the right people with the right mindset together early, whether it be challenge-based, incentive prize, or any other innovation technique you want to use. Get everyone involved. Next slide. Okay, so Challenge.gov. So this is one of the big things I want you to take away from challenge-based acquisition. I see it at MITRE, and I see it with a lot of the clients across the government that I work with. Challenge-based acquisition is not Challenge.gov. Challenge-based acquisition is not incentive and prize challenges. They're different things. Okay. Challenge-based acquisition, Challenge.gov and incentive and prize challenges. I'm not necessarily an expert in that, but essentially what it is market research. You get a prototype, you get a winning solution. And what we saw as the issue or something that needs to be solved with that model is at the end of that, what happens if you don't want just one prototype? What happens if you want to buy quantity and you want to field the solution or refine the solution or test the solution? You can't do it. You got to start over from an acquisition from scratch. That's when the acquisition process starts. So the way we resolve this, there's three ways that we saw as jumping across, and one of them is full and open prize competition, or full and open competition. Basically, after the prize competition, you'll start from scratch, put it out on the street, everyone bids. It takes a year and a half or a year, so on and so forth. The second way is prizes to procurement. We wrote a small white paper. This is if you're doing an incentive and prize competition, and in the middle you say, oh crap, we want to buy quantity, a prototype. This is how you adjust after you start the challenge competition. And the third one, really what we're here to talk about today, is challenge-based acquisition, which gives you the best of both worlds. It gives you the innovation of running a competition, but at the end of that competition, you can also buy something. Next slide, please. So here are the differences, right? So it's like the old Henry Ford quote, if you've seen it before. I want to get to from point A to point B. Right, traditional acquisition. When I say traditional acquisition, I mean, your FAR-based approaches, your standard operating procedures, basically. What do they say? I want to get from point A to point B. I want to give me a faster horse, and everyone comes out and they write this great proposal, and they say, I got the fastest horse. I got the fastest horse. No, I got the fastest horse. Right. Challenge-based acquisition takes a different spin on that. They say, I want you to get me from point A to point B. And I don't care how you get there. I don't care if it's a horse. I don't care if it's a car. I don't care. We have a capability gap, and we need to fill it. And we need to fill it with the best capability. And the capability is not necessarily a horse, right? So traditional acquisition implies a solution, which we see a lot in the government, right? In the Department of Defense, we say, we want to buy this thing, and here's our statement of work, and it lists everything out. Whereas challenge-based acquisition says, we have a capability gap. We're going to run a challenge event under the auspices of the FAR or the OTA, and that challenge event is our requirement. If you're successful in that challenge event, you're going to win the contract. Next is the differences between prize challenges like Challenge.gov and challenge-based acquisition. In prize challenges, the incentive for a vendor or contractor or challenger is a prize award. Could be like a $10,000 prize or whatever the dollar amount. It could be a tour of the White House. It could be you're in some type of marketing YouTube video or something like that. Whereas challenge-based acquisition, the incentive is, you know, long-term relationship with the government. They're looking for that production buy where you're buying 150 widgets, you know, and that's sort of the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow for them. Excuse me? Yeah.
And by the way, we have one or two groups have a continuation.
We do have something that's, I would say, analogous to that, but we don't call it a prize. What we have done in the past is a participation stipends. And those are to cover the cost of simply showing up and participating in the challenge, which might just be some travel costs, that type of, you know, $5,000-$10,000, something like that. In the JIDA case where we did that, that was actually the first task order, and everyone got their $5,000 for travel or whatever it was, and that fulfilled the minimum requirement for funding for those folks. So then after that, if they were not awarded any more task orders, we had already met the IDIQ minimums. So people who participated that didn't get selected to move on to the next step still got some money for the time and the cost of showing up.
Differences between prize challenges and challenge-based acquisition, obviously different authority, right? PTSAC versus FAR and OTA. We'll talk about OTA later. And they're both good. So they're just different. And that's the whole point I'm trying to get out of it. One, market research prototypes, great ideas, networking. The other, same thing, but you can buy product. You can buy quantity without starting from scratch. And that's the critical difference. Next slide. We already talked about this. The bottom line is this, and it's hard, is structuring the actual challenge or challenges within your acquisition. If you can, it's not the acquisition community doing that. Community along with really with the technical folks, building out a script, right? It's how are we going to repeat this challenge event to each of the challengers, so that it's the same, and so that we evaluate them all the same. And they have to know, and that's part of that becomes part of the RFP, and there needs to be some type of scoring algorithm. And that stuff is difficult. So a lot of folks come to us and say, hey, we want to do, it sounds so great. We want to do a challenge-based acquisition, thinking they're going to get things quicker or faster. And that's not necessarily the case. You might get something to the field that actually works quicker and faster in the long run. But there is a heck of a lot of upfront work in challenge-based acquisition. You have to get the right people together, and you have to build up that script, and that's hard. That's hard to do. But if you can do that, typically these challenges are run in some type of quasi-operational environment, sandbox. It might be a site, again, like at JIDA, they went down to Fort Benning. They did culvert, IED detection around culverts, so they actually had live culverts. And they had a whole scenario. And the scenario book was probably 110, 120 pages. You know, actor A is going to come in and do this. Actor B is going to come in and do this, so that it was repeatable from vendor to vendor. Now, that's a big challenge, and there's smaller ones that you can run. There's software challenges that we'll get into, so on and so forth. Anything? Next slide. So the benefits, you know, a couple things. We have version 2 of the handbook out for challenge-based acquisition. It's been out for a while. We'll update you at the end, but essentially we've been working on version 3, unfortunately, for about 12 months, and it's working our way through the public release process. It has a bunch more case studies for you. It has examples of contracting language, so on and so forth. We're hoping that will be out. Our goal is by September 30th this year. With that, you know, our big highlight in version 3 is the other transaction authority approach, and a case study as well with that. Mike will cover that. But challenge-based acquisition is using FAR or OTA, right, to communicate the needed capability through a challenge event. This is the challenge we're going to run, and if you're successful, if you can do what it says in our challenge, that's our requirement. To assess them, we're going to tell them how we're going to assess them, and then at the end, key is purchasing solutions. So some of the benefits of challenge-based acquisition, it's focus, right? So it forces the government team to really know their requirement. It's not about taking a statement of work and, hey, I'm going to work on it for a while and throw it over the fence and make sure the language is pretty and there's no duplication. Sometimes I've been there. You look at this and like, I don't even know what this says, but I think it's right. The focus encourages the government to really get together and collaborate. You have to build that challenge. It has to be written. It has to be almost perfect, because it's got to be repeatable, it's got to be fair, it's got to be transparent, and it's got to measure exactly what you want. The other things, verification. If you don't see it, you don't buy it. We'll talk about different types of challenges. You run a challenge-based acquisition, you know, you have 10, 20, 100 competitors, and no one meets your threshold. You could do a couple things. You can say, we're done. You know, we take good market research. We understand where the space of the solution set. Or you can say, hey, let's repeat the challenge event. We've learned, the vendors learned, the challengers learned. Let's tweak the challenge event a little bit and rerun it. And we'll get into that. And the other thing, a couple things, you buy product, I keep hammering that, but the other thing is fairness, right? So worked with another agency that been running this standing event out in the West, right? And it's this big event where it's a big test bed and these big contractors come out and play, and it's an annual thing, and they stick stuff in, they come out and they bring a bunch of people. And essentially what happens is this is the feedback from the contractors is, yeah, this is great. We're coming out and we're testing stuff, but we're spending millions of dollars and nothing's happening. You're not acquiring anything. We're spending, you know, and they get frustrated, right? They get frustrated. So this levels the playing field. This allows the mom and pop shops in California to come before Benning, because we're going to pay them a stipend. We're going to pay them $5,000, $2,000 travel costs and hotel fees. They can shut their business down for a couple of days. But they're innovative. It might be a mom and pop shop, but they're bringing the best technology to play. Next slide. So sweet spot. So it's not, you know, it's, you've seen it, you know, you see a solution set and you want to, before you even know what your requirement is, I've seen people say, we want to do a challenge-based. We're actually in the middle of one right now. I want to do a challenge-based acquisition. Well, there's a whole slew of questions you need to ask. We have some assessment questions that if you need them, but does it make sense to do a challenge-based acquisition? It sounds good. You know, you might get some great outcomes, but doesn't that make sense? And as you read through the list, understand that you don't have to hit every one of these. Because there's a couple that pop up, and you know, this is not a checklist where you need to be totally complete, but let's go through them real quick. Has rapid schedule demands or responding to an urgent requirement. You need to field something quickly, right? This is not for a major, you know, $500 million system that you're trying to field. Or it's not a fly-off. We're not buying aircraft, but a subsystem, maybe a radar in that subsystem, maybe a subsystem within that subsystem. You want non-traditional sources playing in it, right? You're looking for innovation. You have a clear understanding. You have clear is probably a rough word, but you have an understanding of the quantity. You want to buy quantity and a general price. They can put a price tag to it. And you want some collaboration from industry. You want to engage industry a little bit differently than government has. It's not just your typical RFI or industry day where the government comes in and says, here's our mission, here's our leadership. It's really collaborating with industry, saying, here's our problem. What's your ideas? You know, and that's hard sometimes to do, but it's very effective. And then the last one is wish to pay only for results. So, you know, someone's not successful, you don't hit that threshold. Someone's sort of successful, you can run the challenge again or just stop altogether. Next slide. Within the handbook, and we have the link there, so it's a pretty thick thing, and it's like I said, version 3 is coming out, but these are we've stepped it out, right? Steps 1 through 9. It's without under each category there's meat, right? There's how to do it. You know, some keys to success, so on and so forth. One of the key things I'd like to point out is the acquisition assessment, right? It's understanding what challenge-based acquisition does, and is this the right fit necessarily for what we're trying to do. Most of these fall in line with a typical acquisition, but they have the nuance of challenge-based. The only other thing I would tell you is, you know, I talked about being upfront loaded and working up front. You really have to understand the challenge. And write that, you have to understand the acquisition side and the technical side and how they all play together. And that affects your RFP. You have to be forward looking to say our first task order, our first task will be this challenge event, and that has to go in the RFP and how you're going to evaluate them. We use, you know, sometimes white papers in response to white papers that makes the process efficient. How are you going to evaluate those white papers? It's all spelled out in here. And like I said, if there's questions down the line, please reach out to Mike and I. So a couple things, just to, this picture helps me. I hope it helps you just a little bit. Challenge events. Where can you run them? What is challenge-based acquisition? There's a variety of different places, pre-award and post-award. So pre-award, and Mike will give you an example, is you can use it as a down select mechanism. Think of oral proposals, right? So anyone been involved with oral proposals before? Okay, so oral proposals typically, I was involved with one with GSA FedSim like 8 years ago, probably. But you come in, right, and you develop, instead of a technical proposal, you develop essentially PowerPoint charts, and they tell you what they want in the charge, right? And you bring in your team, and it's not the marketing guy and the CEO, it's the people that are going to be doing the work, right? And you brief the government team. In that briefing and that collaboration where the government's asking you questions, as well as those charts, become your tech prop essentially. So it's expedient, and yet it's very effective. And that's what sort of challenge-based acquisition does. Instead of the oral proposal piece, you run that challenge event up front, and that essentially becomes your technical proposal. You'll ask for more additional information, but the results of how you do, you can go from step 1 to step 2. You didn't pass step 1 of the challenge. Well, 8 of them did. You're on the step 2, or you can have one singular challenge event. The second way is post-award. An example of that would be, we're going to have an IDIQ. We make award for that. We have 10 IDIQ holders. The first task order, we're going to pay you a stipend to come out and participate in the challenge. So they come out and participate in the challenge. The results of that can be used as past performance for the next task order. So how you do and how you write up your scope and your evaluation piece in the original RFP and contract, you might have a refinement for task order 2 or testing or so on and so forth, all the way down to buying quantity. Task order 10, we're going to buy 150 of these things. Next slide. And then real quick, just some terminology. So there's and it's in the book as well, but there's singular challenge events, right? So we're going to run one challenge event, and we're going to see who wins. There's iterative, and I think this is critical. So this is, hey, we're going to conduct a challenge event. If there's no winner, we're going to rerun. There's some learning that the government did during the challenge event, and some learning that the vendors and challengers did as well. We're going to tweak the challenge a little bit, and the vendors and challengers are going to tweak their solutions, right? And then there's the graduated challenge, and you've probably seen this before, where you're going to have off ramps here, right? So you might have a 50 that play in this first challenge event. It's sort of low level. It's not very expensive to run. It's not very expensive to it might be like a software integration challenge where you can do it from the vendor's company online. You get rid of some folks. It might be a little more expensive, more complicated event, and so on and so forth, right? And then there's a hybrid one where you have iterative within the graduated, but that's neither here nor there. Next slide, please. Real quick, so a couple examples, and I think we showed part of the slide last summer, is so Mike and I were involved in the JIDA, now JIDA challenge, back developing the RFP and the IDIQ award, and it's taken off from there. I'm not sure exactly where it's at, but essentially there was an IDIQ was awarded to 20 different challengers. The first task order was to go down to Fort Benning and for culvert surveillance and culvert inspection. And really the cool thing about this was, we talked about the Henry Ford quote, right? We didn't say we need this solution to fix this problem. We said we have this capability gap, and please help us, right? And so the solution space that was set was they had robots, they had UAVs, they had robots that threw UAVs, they had dogs, right? You wouldn't have got that solution space if you said, here's our requirement, we want the fastest horse. We got a problem, help us. The second one is SOCOM, the SOCOM D6 example, and what they did is they used a challenge. They set up a sandbox and they set up a challenge-based acquisition pre-award. So they used it in their selection and their down selection prior to full technical proposal. So instead of getting 2,000 whatever 100 proposals, they used that as a mechanism to get rid of a bunch of people that couldn't integrate properly in their sandbox. So they got 15 or 20 and so forth, and that was successful. And the third one is this the C5 consortium model. That's sort of the newer one, the hotter one, if you will. It's using other transaction authority. Some of you might be familiar with it. I'm not going to go into too much detail with this. Mike's going to really go into detail here shortly. Okay.
So we talked about challenge-based acquisition, and there are some different strategies that we cover in the handbook that we want to just go over here briefly with you. The JIDA example used an IDIQ. And with an IDIQ, as you know, there's a base contract and then subsequent task orders. So what we did in that particular case is we used the first task order as participation in the challenge event, and subsequent task orders were then used for follow-on challenges. In that case, the next task order was awarded was actually some further testing and refinement at ATEC. And that was, I believe, down selected from the 10 and 10 and under the first task order to 3 and 3. Then after that, there would have been another task order for LRIP, and then another task order ultimately for production. But that's not the only way to do it. That was the first way we did it, and that was the basis of kind of the first section of the handbook. You've also got BAA, OTA, as well as simply acquisition of intellectual property. And so to talk a little bit about some of these others and some comparisons here between them. In the case of BAAs, and many of you are familiar with that, it's really more of a focus for things where you've got some more technology development, perhaps some innovation. It's going to be different than the IDIQ structure. The amount of quantity that you're able to purchase with it is going to be limited because of the nature of the BAA. So if you really want to expand and talking about major acquisition as well as support and fielding down the road, BAA might not be the best fit for you. Other transaction authority. So this is totally different outside the FAR, right? These are negotiated agreements that are more closely resembling the commercial agreements between private entities. The typical provisions of the FAR don't apply in these cases. You have to use an existing OT authority. There's a lot of that out there with different consortia and such. The C5 consortia that the Army Cyber Command used is one example, which is being run out of Picatinny under the Army in New Jersey. But it gives you a lot of flexibility by having access to consortia to use the vendors, by getting outside of traditional FAR restrictions, cost accounting standards. They're not protestable, as an example. You can even follow on the OTA, use of the OTA for the prototype development with a sole source contract. So you don't have to go and further compete down the road. So that's something that we've been exploring. It's included in the handbook. It's incredibly innovative and different than the previous approaches that we've been using. And I'm going to get into that here in the next few slides a little more. Yes.
Quick question on that. Is that the DoD's OTA you're referring to? Obviously very.
Yes. Yep. And not with a challenge-based acquisition at this point. Now Ryan has some experience, I think, previously with OT, but not yeah.
Do this outside of OTA, and we don't have an example. You can do OTAs outside of Vermont. Right. I haven't seen, but we haven't worked on a challenge-based OTA plus as of right now.
And then last but not least is IP creation for government procurement. So this is the case where you're not really looking to buy product. And so the difference here is you'd actually kind of be running something along the lines of a Challenge.gov typical challenge, but at the end of it, in exchange for that prize, you're simply going to get the intellectual property that would then allow you to use that down the line. Now, in the case with intellectual property rights, specifically at DoD, if you have government purpose rights, you can then reuse those in pursuit of a government contract elsewhere. So if you had an existing mechanism in place with another vendor or set of vendors, and you acquired some intellectual property as a result of a challenge, you can then go hand that to someone else who's executing on a contract and use that intellectual property to help them achieve what their objectives are under contract. So getting back to OTA here for a second. So this is an interaction diagram. Some of you have seen this before. Some of you have not. What this does, and we have this in the book throughout all the different types of contracting examples. We thought the OT example would be the most interesting since it's the newest here. It shows the interaction and the relationship between the three parties that are involved and each step of that process, which we talked through in the handbook. And so in the case of challenge-based acquisition and OTA and the cyber model, this is the process flow from start to finish, starting with the government. And some of you might be aware with the consortiums, there's a consortium agent, which works as an intermediary. The government relationship is with the consortium agent. The consortium agent has a relationship with the consortium entities, which are industry, academia, mom and pop shops, etc. And so the requests go through the consortium agent to the entities. The responses, same thing, come back. They're evaluated by the government. There's a challenge invite in this case. You execute the challenge. You have the event, which you see here, where the government's executing the challenge. You're collecting your evidence based on the challenge performance. The evidence is what you're using to either off-ramp some folks or continue on down to the next level. In the case of the cyber OTA, there's a second step where they follow up with some more detailed proposals on their solution to include some cost information, for example. We're doing an evaluation there. And then again, another opportunity to off-ramp where they receive funding, and then they're able to deliver the prototype. So touched on this for a second before, but we'll just kind of get into a little more depth here. OTA is what? It's exempt from the FAR. It's a legally binding instrument. It's similar to commercial sector contract. It is not a standard procurement contract, grant, or cooperative agreement. It is not protestable. There are some specific requirements that have to be met in order to use OT. And I will tell you firsthand knowledge that we've had since this has been something that's becoming incredibly popular in the last few years. There are a lot of folks that are trying to take advantage of the flexibility and not being protestable and streamlined lead time for using this that are trying to fit things that might not necessarily fit there. And so there has been increased scrutiny, at least in our experience in the last 6 to 12 months, where folks are really starting to look at what we're pushing through OT. I would not be surprised if at some point the pendulum's going to swing back a little bit, and to the extent that it's being used now, in the future that might become restricted because of perhaps some abuse. These require. Sure.
And you've probably most of you are familiar with the transaction authority. It's just, you said it's sort of the hot thing. It's sort of like innovation. Now you hear OTA all the time. It's a little bit challenging for the technical and acquisition communities because, on one hand, it gives you this flexibility and you're exempt from all this stuff. And on the other hand, you don't necessarily feel comfortable in that environment, right? You almost, like, as much as you hate the rigor and the documentation and the legal reviews and all these laws, and when you don't have those, it feels uncomfortable. So people need to get used to how to use the OT, and you put a little bit of rigor in there, but use the OT the proper way.
So, yes.
Do you have any example of somebody using OTA specifically just to purchase data support, for example, of the challenge?
He asked if there was an example of anyone using an OTA to procure data as a result of the challenge. I mean, data, you mean in terms of like
from a specific source, for example. What's that? Yes. Good example.
I'm not.
Yeah, I'm not overly familiar, but we can ask. We have a couple of POCs that we can further ask that question.
But you're talking about the raw data itself, not the data collection mechanism, not okay.
That presented a challenge for us. That's why.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think, for OTA to use OTA, it's got to be what, research development or prototype.
Well, it's got to be a prototype.
Right.
Okay. It can be an analysis, process improvement, hardware or software. Follow-on production is now acceptable. It might not fit under there because now the definition of prototype is very broad and general, and people have been expanding what that is. But
in this case, it was specific to support a challenge.
Okay.
We were run.
I see.
We were looking for a specific vendor data, but we had to go through the regular procurement process.
I see.
Which created
a problem.
problem for us.
Some of the other key OTA requirements here must be directly relevant to enhancing mission effectiveness, must address at least one of the OTA technology objectives. Each OTA is unique to this particular scope that it was set up under. So there are OTAs for issues related to spectrum. There are OTAs for issues related to, in the case of C5, it's the C5 things, command and control, cybersecurity issues. There are OTAs related to Navy ships and corrosion. I mean, just all across the board, all kinds of different things. Within the scope of that, what you're looking for needs to be found in an existing OTA vehicle. You can go and pursue setting one up, but I think in order to get that to really work, you'd have to have enough demand beyond your own demand to really justify going and doing that.
Is anyone in the room using other transaction authority for any of their prize competitions? So that's two to three people. I think DIUX has done some work with other transaction authority, and I know we've been in touch with them and hope to bring them in the future to talk more about some of the work that they're doing, if that's a topic that you all want to learn more about. Okay, great.
Last two things here, which I think, last but certainly not least, there are two requirements here that have to be met for the folks that are participating, one of two. One is that a non-traditional defense contractor is participating to a significant extent. The second is which is an 1/3 of the cost sharing requirement for traditional defense contractors. So what this means is this is not a vehicle that is designed to simply be used in lieu of a FAR-based contract to go and get access to the usual people that we go and do business with all the time as an end run around of all the rules and regulations. The intent of this was to get non-traditional folks that are innovative, that have high barriers to entry in the government marketplace to get in the door, to be able to have access for prototyping, because they simply can't compete on the normal FAR-based procurement process. So you can team with the big guys. There's no problem with that. The big guys can pay their way in, which is actually great because it reduces now the government's cost burden. But this is something not to be underestimated in terms of the importance and what the original intent here is of who you're targeting and why you're trying to get those innovative folks in the door. So benefits, project under 50 million can be awarded in 90 days. Small business, non-traditional innovators, flexibility and IP provisions, those are negotiated. So you can negotiate those at two levels. The first level is with the consortium itself. Within their member agreements, they typically have different IP requirements among the consortium members that everyone already understands up front, is built in as being a member of that consortium. But at the agreement level between the entity that's funding the consortium member for the particular project, you can also negotiate specific IP licensing. Government PMs retain total project management control. This is really important. When you hear about a government agent and then you hear the contracts being done by Picatinny in New Jersey, and I'm with the Coast Guard, it makes it sound like someone else is going to be handling all this stuff and I'm not going to be having any control over it. That's not the case. You will still retain project control. In the case of challenges, you're going to be able to evaluate who's in and who's out. You might have to use a standardized process that Picatinny is using and that particular consortium is using for how the white paper is structured, or how the evaluation criteria are laid out, or the timing of things. But you're able to design your challenge, you're able to negotiate your agreements, and you're able to maintain control over execution of the work as you normally would. No mandatory cost accounting standard or certified cost and pricing data. This is really important because a lot of folks that are non-traditional government vendors simply can't meet this standard. And we've heard a lot, particularly Silicon Valley type folks. We'd love to do work with the government. I've got something to solve your problem today. I can't get in the door and sell it to you because I don't meet these requirements. So the OTs allows you to get around that. Just quickly, legal framework. There's the statutory authority, consortium statutory authority. What still applies? Criminal law, federal fiscal law, procurement integrity, CFC claims. Doesn't apply. Competition and contracting, truthful cost and pricing data, procurement protest system, FAR and DFARS. Consortium, quickly, we talked about that a little bit earlier. The key point here is, what is a consortium? It's an enterprise partnership between the government and a group of vendors. The government can be a single sponsor or multiple sponsors that coordinate through a lead agency. The consortium members are bound by a consortium member agreement, which governs the activities and relationships of the participants. It establishes, maintains that relationship, and it defines the rules and procedures regarding intellectual property and data rights. CMA is not part of the OT agreement, so this is really important. And that if we think back to that diagram I put up earlier regarding the interaction, the government relationship is with the consortium agent. The government has a contract with the consortium agent. The consortium agent is a manager of the members within the consortium. The consortium member agreement is an instrument that's between those members of industry and academia and the consortium agent. The government's relationship is one-on-one between itself and the agent works as the manager of that group on the government's behalf.
Talk about how that agent recruits non-traditionals to the consortium, or I mean, do they have like offices and stuff?
So in our experience, the consortium agents that we work with have essentially they almost, I don't want to say marketing. They function as recruitment entities because they get a piece. It might be a percentage, might be 2% of everything that goes through the consortium.
Right. Yeah, they get an admin fee, but that doesn't answer your question. I think, truthfully, I don't think they do a good job. I think they fail to. I think. I mean, we know it from personal experience. Won't name names, but part of their job is to do exactly that, and that function's sort of left by the wayside. Now they're growing membership. Membership to get in the consortium is obviously some type of background check. It's $500. You want to play, you want to be part of the consortium, potentially partner. It's literally, you can go on the C5 consortium or any of these other websites, click on the thing and say join, and you're paying $500. And of course, there's a couple other things, but that's a great question, and that's a frustration we talked about a couple of weeks ago. Is they don't go out and recruit. They don't go out and build their membership. And I'm saying, I'm talking about, I have one data point for this, right? But if they did that, or if they were incentivized to do that, that would be a good thing.
I think in that particular case, though, that is the example, one that's now so overwhelmed with work that they're not doing that anymore because they can't keep up with what they've got. Correct. So that's I have another case with a different example of one that's just getting started up. It's called MTech. It's the Medical Technology Enterprise Consortium. These folks are actively pounding the pavement and doing recruitment because they've only been around for 18 months and they're just trying to get spun up. And I wouldn't be surprised in 3 years if they've got 500 members and 45 agreements going through them, that they probably would cycle back as well, just like the other group here. So again, just like we talked about, government, the transaction authority, the consortium agent, they have that technology agreement then with the consortium member.
So realize with this, the whole diagram is supposed to show this is the government has a need to set up a consortium. Let's say we're not tapping into an existing, we want to set up one for some type of cyber or for whatever, some capability gap. The government essentially puts out in FedBizOps or Army Single Face Industry, whatever you guys use to get that stuff out, and say, the RFP or the RFI is, hey, we want to set up a consortium for this, and here's our scope, and we're looking for, basically, they're looking for that person to set it up and run it. That's what the vendor is. The vendor is the consortium agent that sets up, runs, administers, hopefully brings people in, so on and so forth. So that's the initial kickoff, is getting that entity set up.
The examples that we've been giving you are cases where this is set up already. So these are out there in existence and you can go and tap into those if the scope of that particular consortium fits what your need is. If it doesn't, then you would be starting from scratch and doing what we were just talking about.
So are there any consortiums that are out there that can fulfill classified requirements?
So the question was whether there were any consortiums that could handle classified requirements.
I mean, I am certain that the nature of what's going on at C5 has classified requirements. But what I would say is one of the benefits of using a challenge is that you can design the challenge in such a manner to essentially mask what classified requirements might be, still do it out in the open, and just create unclassified analogs, which would help you address that issue. I can't give you a specific example at C5. I can't imagine there's any way they're doing all the cyber work that they're doing without having quite a bit of it, frankly, classified.
Yeah, and we'll have a list of other consortiums that at least we found out. You'll see some of the titles of these things, and they're.
For those of us not in the DoD and not having access to your OTA, is it possible, do you think, to use a cooperative agreement under the grant authority to do the same thing that you're doing? Portion of your something unique about the OTA?
I'm not certain that you don't have access to the OTA.
We have our own. NASA has our own.
Oh, you're
Oh,
nasty.
okay, right. Yeah. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
NASA, yeah, that's
Yeah.
yeah. Um,
You know, we haven't tackled cooperative agreements. Sort of not by choice, but it was, yeah. But NASA's got a ton of flexibility. I mean, you guys do a lot of great things. You really do.
The DoD OTA has some unique aspects that NASA does not have.
Okay.
well, the only thing I would suggest there, I mean, if there is opportunities to identify some requirements, particularly from a challenge perspective, that might be overlapping with a DoD entity, you know, you could then leverage a partnership and perhaps get some access to it that way. So benefits, we talked a little bit about this already. You know, collaboration across industry and academia, making technology more accessible. Certainly for industry, it allows for innovative relationships and partnerships, collaboration with government during requirements development process and project definition. And for the technology base, you're getting rapid response to DoD customer needs, and R&D activities are now focused on demonstration of prototypes. You know, this really helps with respect to getting down the road and buying something and then finding out, perhaps when it's too late, too much time and money's been invested, that wasn't the right product that you needed. The challenge, it demands a capability that's kind of got a high TRL level already, because you have to be able to show up and make it work in a real world environment. But by definition, that means we're going to know pretty well by the end of the challenge event whether the solution we're buying, if we decide to buy, is one that's going to meet our needs, without having a whole lot of money invested up front throughout that initial development process, only to find out something doesn't work or doesn't meet our requirements at the end. This is a listing of just some of the consortium that are out there. I can leave this up here for a minute if folks want to jot it down, but I also think we can shoot this out to folks. Okay.
Question for C5, do you have like a budget that's already allocated, appropriated for given challenges? How do you deal with that? Like, how do you know like what the pot is? Do you have like $50 million a year that, you know, the need for the Army and this entity has, we want to give these companies?
I believe they're treating each of them as separate. So when a need comes down, and these are all typically urgent needs, and Larry, who we work with at MITRE, who's working this with them, within 90 or 120 days, they're getting these out the door. And so these are probably smaller, quicker, faster. And as there's a need, they're pulling $1 million for this or $2 million for that. And each one of them is being treated as separate. It's not a large, overarching, like, ongoing cyber challenge.
That was one of my first questions. I was up at Pickaninny. I asked the person that runs the actual C5 from the admin piece, from the government side, you know, what's the ceiling on this OTA? You know, is it because they keep having all these different people coming to you know, hundreds of millions on. She said there is none.
But it's the actual appropriated money. I know a lot of
Yeah.
people have ceilings.
Right.
It's the actual money that
Sure.
that you have. to
Right.
Give within a, you know,
Right.
whatever the.
Yeah.
That's never really been clear. The consortium thing.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question. We can get back to you.
So we showed you a little bit earlier the interaction diagram for how how the OTA works generically. This is how it works with the Army Cyber Innovation Challenge using C5. There's a cyber priority requirement synopsis that goes out to the consortium. Consortium members come back with white papers. Those are then down selected, and a challenge event is executed and evaluated against. There's an invite for a full proposal, which includes greater detail and costing information. There's a government proposal evaluation. Based on that, then there's the extension and execution of agreements for that particular solution. They've been doing this with the goal of 90 days from requirement and funding profile to execution. Typical white paper model, which is to here, is within 60 days. Are they on their 5th or 6th at this point? And so this is how they've been doing it in the book. In the book, we have a detailed case study. We include an example of the requirement synopsis and the white paper evaluation factors that they used for, I believe it was either the first or second challenge that they ran. And then we have step-by-step kind of breakdown of how they're doing all this. So once this is publicly released, you're going to be able to see exactly how they wrote the challenge, exactly what they were asking folks to bid against, and how, at least in this example, they've been executing challenges under OTA. And with that,
Yeah, just real quick on the way ahead, so where we're at. So some of you we briefed before a year ago. So we, like I said, there's version 2 of the handbook's been out. Version 3 we hope to have out very shortly, and it's going to be many more examples and templates. But the whole purpose of the handbook is to actually make it so that someone can pick it up and go, okay, here's what I need to do, and not just a pie in the sky type thing. Give you examples, templates, use cases, so on and so forth. Hopefully by the end of September it'll be through our public releases. But if you want it, shoot us an email. Copy as soon as it's off the press. We're also developing a a portal that's going to be mapped off of the Challenge.gov. If you've ever been to their website to walk you through the different steps, we're going to use that same for specifically challenge-based acquisition. Lastly, I'll tell you, like I said, Mike and I's passion. It's sort of our side jobs at MITRE, the challenge-based piece. If you have questions, you want to talk through something, whatever you need. We're at FFRDC. We're not, which is different than, for-profit companies. We're here, we're your partner. We're here helping us. So whatever you need, reach out to us.
and most of you probably have access to MITRE already in some form or fashion anyway. So it really isn't a big deal. If you're interested in exploring a challenge or based acquisition or OTA or anything, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Any other questions?
Okay. Well, I want to thank you all very much for the presentation. This has been very helpful. I just want to remind everyone who's in the room and also the folks online that this presentation is being recorded. So a lot to digest here and unpack. We'll make it available to you so that you can review and put your questions together. And if we can help you answer that or direct you to the MITRE folks, we're happy to do that. So we're running a little bit over. We're going to take a brief 10-minute break. We'll meet back here at 10 minutes after 10. Again, just a reminder, the restrooms are across the hall. There's a small coffee shop down on the first floor. All the way at the end of the hall, turn left and go down in the elevator to the first floor, and the coffee shop is right in that area there. And then otherwise, we'll meet back here in about 10 minutes, 10 after 10. Thanks. as we get started with this next portion of this meeting, I thought we could just go around the room briefly and have folks introduce themselves. I'm going to wait and introduce our next speaker, Chris Rasmussen, here in a second. But if everybody could just give their name and the organization they're with, that'd be great.
Hi there, I'm Vicki McFadden. I'm with GSA's 18F team, engagement manager on our acquisition side with some parts of DoD, NGA, and NRO right now. So very interested in this presentation.
Okay, thanks.
Johanna Jones with the Defense Innovation Unit Experimental Strategic Engagement and Public Affairs activities here in Washington, D.C.
Kim Brandt. I work at NGA in the Office of Ventures and Innovations doing hackathons and challenges.
Jonas Skinner. I also work at NGA Office of Hackathons and Challenges.
Hi, my name is Adam Karitas, and I represent the JPEO.
Eric Beidel. I work with Kelly and Tammy here at Challenge.gov.
Hi, I'm Praveen Pillai. I'm with Department of Labor, OSHA. I manage a small program there.
Hey, good morning. I'm Andy Howell with Coast Guard Innovation.
Scott Hargate, Office of Strategy and Innovation for the Department of the Navy.
Andrew Swanson, National Reconnaissance Office with Advanced Systems and Technology Directorate.
Cheryl Rakestraw, DHS.
Good morning, Emily Hall. I work with EPA's Innovation Team.
Hi, Megan Breiter, Department of State.
Hi, Mike Contreras. I work on the Proof Challenge with the Joint Program Executive Office for Chem Biological Defense.
Good morning, Rob Hall. I'm with the National Maritime Intelligence Integration Office.
Good morning, John Middleman. I'm with Naval Research Laboratory.
I'm Gary Khalil. I'm also with the National Maritime Intelligence Integration Office.
Carl Becker with NASA's Center of Excellence for Collaborative Innovation.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all again for being here today. And with that, I'm going to introduce our next speaker. Chris Rasmussen is the program manager for the GEO and Pathfinder project at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. He designed the Living Stories Challenge to create a dynamic, fast, and aesthetic way to easily track version changes within a living document. So Chris, come on up. Welcome.
Thanks. Not going to do any slides. Just going to kind of talk to the actual challenge. I'm not going to get into the legalese, so I'm not going to do any of that type of stuff. I'm going to talk how it was done, how we spoke English to the public, how it was integrated, how it's being used, and the next steps. So one of the huge challenges that we have, not just esoterically to the intelligence community, but more broadly, is that the challenge between evergreen and ephemeral content in any type of storytelling. The stock content that doesn't change that much, and the quick transactional updates. Now, outside of source control and environments like GitHub, where you can track the changes to source code, when it comes to the document side, you have Google Living Docs and you have wikis. What we were looking at is kind of when people are tracking the changes, it's a very messy working document. So if you're using MediaWiki, you have to go into these radio buttons to compare selected versions and hit compare. And the markup doesn't look all that great. So what we were doing in the Pathfinder project was 100% unclassified effort. Our agency is going through a massive, massive disruption. What was once a government-protected monopoly to put satellites in space is now being massively commercialized and privatized. A lot of the value and retraining talent in our agency is going to come on the skill sets required to make sense of the massive volume of unclassified data. And the Pathfinder was basically a huge retraining program for a lot of our analysts to be able to do that. So one of the things that came out of it, when it came to time to tell the story of the analysis that was done, we didn't want to issue a product every single time a story came out. What we wanted to be able to do was update the body of the story and track the changes very aesthetically, very, very simply. So we had some of our developers take a swing at it, and we kind of got locked into these kind of time sliders. And if you made a edit way at the top of the document, at the way at the bottom, it was bouncing all over the place. The web was always trying to center itself. So we were running into some challenges. So we thought of, hey, let's crowdsource this. So we wanted to put it on Challenge.gov. And a huge problem, this was addressed in the earlier presentation, is speaking English. Our DODEs are, you have to learn how to speak English when you're putting something on YouTube.
So we had to speak English. So I think that was a real success story for our challenge. We made a very crystal clear YouTube video, absolutely no acronyms. And the test is, can an educated outsider that does not live in the metro area watch it, read it, and know exactly what to do? That's the key. Now, it sounds simple, but it's extremely hard. You see the movie The Renaissance Man, when Danny DeVito joined the Army and he started speaking Army, and somebody asked him for the instructions and he just went on 16 sentences of acronyms. That happens very, very quickly in our community. And it's particularly if you want to get non-traditionals, you have to speak English. So the test that you use is, can an educated outsider and an educated developer get this immediately? And if the answer is no, you got to go back and do it again. So that was the thing that we did. The challenge itself was done all in GitHub. So we have a paid account in GitHub. We didn't want to put people that needed to sign up for private repos in GitHub. So the folks basically forked our private repo, which gave them access so people couldn't see their work. And all of the source code was submitted to this challenge for us to evaluate. And I was talking about these kind of time sliders that we got locked into. Well, when the challenge was done, our public affairs tweeted it. A guy from Iowa read it, took a swing at it, and that's who we paid $10,000 to. Complete outsider. I mean, Iowa couldn't have been better. We were looking completely at the code, but I'm really glad somebody not from DC won. So Iowa was perfect for that. So it forked the repository, came back, and it was a very simple thing that we just weren't thinking of. We kind of got tunnel vision on these time sliders. It was, we now call it the VCR button design. So in the changing text part of our applications, we have apps and the web version, and I'll talk to just about that in just a second. There's a center play button that always says when the story was last updated. And very simply, like rewind and fast forward on a VCR button, it just goes left, right in color codes and shows you exactly where in the document things are changing. It couldn't be more simple, but often the simplest stuff is really hard to do. And you're going to be able to see this soon publicly. So the apps that we designed, the reporting that came out of the Pathfinder and is starting to roll out in other parts of the community, we distributed an app called Tearline not too long ago. We distribute the app in the public stores in iTunes and Google Play. You download it, but you need government credentials to get the non-public release content. So it's kind of like downloading the Bank of America app. If you're not a customer, it doesn't do any good. Since it is public, a lot of people are downloading it. Wired Magazine has written about it and other things. People are downloading it and go, this app stinks. I can't get access to it. The comments are hilarious on some of on the posts. This has got Stuxnet written all over it because it's from the intelligence community. It's pretty funny. But you'll be able to see this coding challenge pretty soon, because what we're working on now is we're going to start publicly releasing public products on the prison camp abuses in North Korea with a non-governmental organization. So we're partnering with the Committee for Human Rights in North Korea that reports on the state of the gulag and prison labor camp abuses inside of North Korea. And we're going to be partnering with them to keep pressure on the regime, and the public will be able to consume this in the apps and this web version. So when you see the web version coming out, you'll see the VCR button design. So as the story changes on the labor camp and prison camp abuses inside of North Korea publicly, you'll be able to see what we paid for, the code that we paid for. So when the story changes, you want to see the changes to the story, just hit the VCR button and there's the change to the story. That's one feature among many. We brought in the design firm IDEO to consult on the look and feel of the web version. And the apps, you'll also be able to see how the story changes inside of the apps as well. So there's different features here. As you can see, kind of that VCR button design at the top to track the story. So when we launch, we're going to be launching this in conjunction with this thing called the Public's Daily Brief. So the President of the United States gets the presidential, the PDB, the Presidential Daily Brief. The Director of National Intelligence is working this thing called the Public's Daily Brief that's going to premiere here in October. And our content, the original analysis from the apps that we're designing, is going to be feeding the Public's Daily Brief. Now, a lot of the stories that you're going to see are going to be about the intelligence community. Ours is original content and analysis. So it's going to be branded very, very different than the intelligence community is not spying on you stories or another contract was awarded. A lot of the kind of public affairs stuff that comes out of the intelligence community. This is going to be original content and analysis that's going to be feeding the Public's Daily Brief. You'll be able to go to DNI.gov, you'll see this new service called Intelligence.gov. Click on that and the public's daily brief, and our feed will be coming in there. It'll kind of be like an RSS widget that'll click back to our IDEO-inspired design where we integrated the code for the version control system. If you like apps, we overachieved and built apps because people love apps. You'll be able to download, we're modifying the Terraline apps to run without username and password. So when you do download the app, the public release stories will simply run inside the app, and then the non-public release content will be behind credentials like it is today. But we're modifying that so it'll just run. So the people that are trashing our app on Google Play and the Apple Store and say this sucks because we can't see anything, they'll be able to see something now, and you'll be able to see kind of the living stories design that we're incorporated into it. So that's the nuts and bolts of the story. Pretty successful. Key lessons learned: you got to speak English. YouTube is your friend. Please, a lot of people don't speak this language, and you lose people very, very quickly. If you want to get to developers, and this was a software challenge, you have to speak the language of the development community, and that is not contractees. So you got to be crystal clear in plain English to educated outsiders. That's the best tip that I can give you. Anybody has? Clear as mud?
Plain English, that is key, and we really appreciate that. We did run a webinar on the use of plain English in writing good challenge competition content just last month, so we can make sure to give anyone the link if you're interested in looking at some of the tips that the plain English, plain language community or practice developed specifically for this community. So thank you very much for that.
You bet.
Appreciate it.
You bet. Thank you.
So, thanks.
I'm pulling something.
Careful. All right, you just want to switch that off. And then next up, we've got Gary Khalil, Robert Hall, Dr. John Middleman, and Carl Becker. They're going to present on the Fishing for Fishermen Challenge. And welcome.
Get to my slides here, I guess.
Just
oh, look at that.
There you go.
My name is Gary Khalil. I'm the counsel for the National Maritime Intelligence Integration Office, which is a Navy entity. I'm telling that right up front so that you understand that we understand that this whole seminar is for DoD folks who are interested in the whole idea of crowdsourcing and challenges. So a Navy entity that serves as the National Intelligence Manager for the maritime domain. We're chartered by the Director of National Intelligence, and we're focused on all the things that the Office of Naval Intelligence isn't. They're worried about gray hull Navy ships. We're worried about everything else. We're worried about fish. We're worried about pollution. We're worried about climate. And so one of the things we hope to do is to build communities to protect the maritime domain. And we do that through things like our annual Global Maritime Forum. And in 2015, we held our Global Maritime Forum at the NASA Ames Research Lab out in Mountain View, California. And it's not just a conference where everybody sort of gets together and talks about, oh, I haven't seen you in a year. No, these are folks that we get together. They're wicked smart people. We bring them in from all over the world, and we give them a problem to solve. And in 2015, the problem that we gave them to solve was, how can we make better use of the massive volume of data that we already have? The previous speaker, Chris, just talked about how we're being inundated with all sorts of commercial data. We're swimming in data. We're drowning in data. How can we do a better job of understanding it? And so we gave that problem to our smart people who attended the 2015 Global Maritime Forum. And one of the ideas that came out was a crowdsourcing competition to focus on the idea of illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing, which is a growing problem around the planet. This graphic, if you take nothing else from this presentation, this graphic will tell you a ton of how we approach this. The graphic itself was crowdsourced. We did a competition. We got how many? Probably 15 or 20 various graphic designs. We picked this one. We modified it slightly. And it tells you everything you need to know. It tells you about the problem that we're trying to solve. It tells you about how we're hoping to solve it by applying innovative algorithmic techniques. The first part of the problem was, hey, is somebody fishing? It may be calling itself a cargo boat, but if it's engaging in behavior that looks more like a fishing boat, it's fishing. And then if it's fishing, part two was, what kind of fishing are they doing? If they're saying, I'm fishing for tuna, but they're acting like a ship that is fishing for, say, swordfish, which is a much more expensive fish, right? Then they're doing something wrong. And we want to identify the anomalies that will indicate what kind of fishing the boat is doing. In our case, our community in this consisted of the Department of Defense, Homeland Security, the U.S. Coast Guard, NASA, Harvard's Crowdsourcing Crowd Innovation Laboratory, and a couple others, Naval Research Labs being a big one, because Rob and I both work for NIMEO, and this is inherently a mathematics problem. What Rob knows about math is if you take a pizza and divide it into 8 pieces, 8 people get a slice. What I know about pizza, or what I know about math, is if you divide a pizza into 8 pieces, I get 8 pieces. That's the extent of it. So what we got is some wicked smart people, Dr. Middleman, the folks at NASA, to help us work through the sheer mathematics of it. And it turns out that NASA is involved in all sorts of math. It takes a lot of math to put someone on the moon. So we got ourselves involved with the right people. We got them in the right place at the 2015 Global Maritime Forum, and we gave them the problem to solve. At this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Rob, and he can tell you about IUU fishing.
Good morning. So why fishing? In 2014, it was a national priority. The president put together a task force to actually focus on how do we combat illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing. So that's probably why at the GMF, the groups chose that problem area as a primary focus area. And John was at that conference, so you could probably speak a little bit more about the groups and how they the different problem sets that came about and why they chose that problem. You want to chime in on that?
Well, there was a huge amount of diversity and floundering around, not to make a bad pun on illegal fishing, but the basic understanding of essentially all the people is that we have a lot of data, we have a lot of information, which I sort of define as a collected set of data about an entity like a vessel, but we don't have a lot of sense making. We don't have any answers to why it's doing what it's doing. And so most of the groups focused in some sense on a maritime activity, whether it was illegal trafficking in people or drugs or fishing, that homed in on this idea of let's try and figure out what the data is telling us about motive, intent, and actual activity, even though it may not be declared. And of all the kind of illicit activities that were talked about, that was mainly the focus, illegal fishing had the widest appeal and the lowest barriers to getting cooperation on an international level, the lowest barriers to sharing information that might otherwise be blocked by title authority limitations, and just fell out as the natural place to go to cut our teeth, to hone our skills, to introduce ourselves to the new world of machine learning and big data analytics.
So our boss likes to refer to IUU fishing as evil fishing, and John mentioned the international aspect of it. So a lot of our what we call the global maritime community of interest extends to our international partners, and we in this endeavor with IUU fishing, we found an unnatural, I would say unnatural partner in these the Pew Institute non-governmental organizations, and they want to throw all kinds of money at this problem. So we knew we were in a sweet spot when we picked this area for the data challenge, and one of the outcomes that we had hoped for was to create an algorithm that we could then turn around to our international partners and our NGOs and say, hey, here's a solution that you can integrate into whatever capabilities you have to combat your illegal fishing problem. Oh, hang on. No, you're good. Next slide. So how did we choose, or why did we choose NASA? Again, it goes back to the partnership for the GMF that Gary talked about. We partnered with NASA on that effort, and that kind of led us to Carl and the COSI.
So a couple words about what COSI is. Center of Excellence of Collaborative Innovation was stood up in 2011, and essentially is a way for the community of government agencies to use the expertise we've developed at NASA and the NASA Tournament Lab and contracts, and those are both incredibly important. So we, through interagency agreement, can allow through the Economy Act, can allow any other agency to come in and run a challenge with us. All of our challenges are FAR-based, simply for the fact that not everyone has OTA, and the Economy Act says you can only do through Economy Act what you could do through your own inherent authority. So our challenges are FAR-based. And so with Nimio, we because it is a data challenge, we went ahead and put it out to our contractor base. We have IDIQ contracts with Topcoder, Common Pool, InnoCentive, HeroX, Kaggle, Luminary Labs, 9 Sigma, OpenIDEO, Petexia, and Tongle. So we have a huge industrial base of crowdsourcing platforms, and as our deputy director likes to say, curated communities of solvers who can then attack a problem. Topcoder was the selected platform for this. And they executed the challenge. I want to say a little bit also about the other expertise that we have within the Center of Excellence, and that is as Gary mentioned earlier, the Harvard Crowd Innovation Lab. And Harvard brings two things to the table. First of all, the science of crowdsourcing, and so Dr. Karim Lakhani is the director of that laboratory, and he is one of the most well-published and cited academics in terms of the science of crowdsourcing. We didn't really need that capability in this challenge, but I did want to mention that. The other aspect that Harvard brings to the table is data science, and they are extremely knowledgeable in that, and that was really key to making this challenge work. We were at and I still have it circled on my calendar, at one of our telecons when we'd conducted our initial challenge just based on trajectory data from the AI, Automated Information System data collected, which is of course the transponder that every ship has. And Rob drops the load on the desk and says, we are looking for solutions that are not limited to just simply trajectory data only. We want to make sure we take into account all the other environmental, bathymetry, whatever other kind of factors and data that might be out there. And so our Harvard expertise helped look at how to fabricate a data set, working with John, and that could then be used in the challenge in a way that did not potentially allow someone to game the system and use data that would not be available to everyone. So fundamentally, the launching of the effort, again, a two-stage effort, and the major part of the I'll say the groundwork, spade work that had to be done was this idea of taking the raw data that we procured, ground truthing it so that we knew exactly what each ship was actually doing. Dr. Middleman actually had to call some fishing companies and talk to the captains of the boat. What were you doing on such and such a date, in order to ground truth? I was fishing. Yeah, but for what? Flounder. And then anonymizing that data so that the data could not necessarily be again used as a source for others to go back and do what John had done and call the guy, because they did not know the exact because of the anonymization. And then with that, I guess on the money and so forth, back to you.
This is a great story. You want to? This is awesome.
So we did this whole effort for equivalent of about 1 FTE, 225K is about what we paid.
For the one full-time equivalent, 225K. We brought in the folks from the Stimson Center who have been working with Google. Google has dumped a ton of money on this. And we brought them in and we were explaining what we were doing. And the match one algorithm, are you fishing, was 98% effective. Fell out of their chairs. 98%, that's amazing. 98.8. Okay, I stand corrected. And then they asked, how much did that cost? And Doc Middleman says, well, we paid the winner $5,000. At that point, I mean, they just were just stunned into silence. It was really an awesome sort of visual.
So talking a little bit about the data, the automatic identification system, AIS data, is broadcast voluntarily. It's not mandated for fishing vessels, et cetera, et cetera. There are a lot of limitations. But we felt that this was geographically really good data, aside from the possibility of spoofing, and that we could learn how to recognize behaviors with this very high quality data that would eventually help us understand how to recognize those same behaviors when we didn't have AIS data, when we had other sources of data, perhaps less frequent, perhaps less geographically precise. At least we'd learn what these behaviors looked like, essentially. We got data from the big data producers, ExactEarth and Orbcom provided the majority of the data. I would note that nowadays there are a lot of other sources. Spire has a bunch of satellites up. Every university in the world has it. There's also terrestrial data from the Maritime Safety and Security Information System. There are a lot of sources of data, and we're beginning to see data from, for example, Planet Dove satellites that's getting denser and denser and denser. In other words, not just one dot a day, but more than that. And it's beginning to sort of look a little bit like the persistent data you get out of signals type, AIS signals type. Not there yet, but the interest we had in learning how to do this. We also incorporated bathymetric and oceanographic data, sea surface temperature, thermocline depth, sea surface height, current speeds, chlorophyll content, that the Coast Guard, bathymetry and chlorophyll and temperature primarily, finds very, very useful in predicting where fishing behavior will be. That's where the fish are going to be. And so we incorporated that with the amazing skills of the Harvard Crowd Innovation Lab into the data set. That data is actually produced in general by NOAA and by Naval Research Lab at Stennis. The DigitalGov did us an enormous favor of kind of pulling the data, collating it, getting it into shape so that we could just stick it directly into our data set. And so we thank him for that. It was totally pro bono. It's just a wonderful cooperative community. Everybody has in the same direction, whether it's Pew Trust or the Waif Group or Google or National Geographic. Everybody is pointed in that same direction. So we had a lot of data in the phase one. The Coast Guard Living Marine Resources people actually took information that is not publicly available, the vessel monitoring system, to get the ground truth. And we didn't publish that data. We published a derived product from it. This vessel is fishing or not at this particular position report. That took like 11 days of the LMR, Living Marine Resource people's time, to go through the data for 10 100 by 100 boxes around the world in the ocean. The winning solutions crank in, I don't know, but the competitors submit several times a day working on that whole entire data set. So we're making really great advances. Phase one, are you fishing or not at each particular position report, was kind of a softball in that if a vessel declared itself in its AIS broadcast to be a fishing vessel, and it wasn't going fast enough just to be going from point A to point B, it was doing 2 knots in the middle of the ocean, that's probably fishing. But we got very, very high quality solutions, as Gary mentioned. Phase two, what kind of fishing you're doing is way more complex. and we're looking at the shape of the tracks, for example, in AIS data, which is broadcast like every 10 seconds under normal conditions. A purse seiner sort of looks like that, and he closes the purse, and then he spends about a half hour, 40 minutes picking up fish, then he goes somewhere else and sets the net again. Interestingly, there may or may not be a satellite overhead when that happens. So the question of data density again comes up, and we're learning about that in a very quantitative way through the winning solutions to these problems. The actual number crunching, thanks to the Maritime Intelligence Fusion Center Pacific in Alameda, their Living Marine Resources people did a Herculean effort to get ground truth. In the second phase, we relied on the regional maritime fishing organizations that register longliners, register purse seiners, register trawlers. There are a number of them around the world. We use that data with the cooperation of FAO and a number of other organizations. That was kind of our ground truth set. We at NRL did the identification of 3 months worth of vessel tracks for about 3,000 vessels, and that became the data set. Harvard Crowd Innovation Lab added the bathymetric and the oceanographic data, and that was the final fully fleshed out data. So a cooperative effort all along the way, and all of us are absolutely stunned at the scores that are coming in. The actual method of scoring is called the receiver operating characteristic, or area under the curve. We can explain that later, but at any rate, it's totally machine driven. It's calculated as the solution is run, and the competitors know exactly how they're being scored, and that's very important. And we're getting up around kind of 95% sort of accuracies, and that's pretty darn good. It provides good, solid operational advice to law enforcement from Coast Guard or from NOAA.
So in conclusion, we did match 1 that ended last fiscal year. Match 2, as match 1 results were, like I said, 98.8% effective. Match 2, we used all sorts of new kinds of data, much denser data, so it was a much harder problem to solve for the folks. The idea was that if you got really dense data, I've got the slide here, I'm good. You can more accurately track what that ship is doing and is it behaving like it's supposed to do. The competition ended at 9 o'clock Friday evening. We've already got the preliminary results in. Our top 10 competitors, this is the coolest thing about crowdsourcing. 1 from Brazil was the winner, 2 from Poland, Slovakia, 2 from Russia, 1 from Vietnam, 1 from Spain, 1 from India, and 1 from France. So this is folks all around the world. The top competitor got $10,000 for doing this. If you're in the DoD audience listening to this saying, how can I do that? The answer is, this came out of the 2015 GMF. The guy who initiated it, Dr. Paul Shapiro, like a rat off a ship, ran and got another job after we developed the problem, and he puts it in Rob's lap. And Rob, for 1.5 years, has been managing this thing, and he got it done with no prior experience in crowdsourcing or challenges. So you can do this. If you have a question, talk to the Challenge.gov team. They'll put you in contact with us, and we would be happy to work with you. But this was a great experience. Like Doc Middleman said, everybody is just astounded at how effective this was and how cost effective it was. So subject to that, if you have any questions, we would be glad to answer them. Sure.
So one of the things I really liked that you talked about was the excitement over the fishing topic. We do hackathons as well, which is kind of a close sibling to challenges. And we have a little more data from that. And one of the things that we found is that we get a little too militaristic or DoD, and a lot of people get turned off. But we get a much larger, broader crowd. Broader crowd when we find something that's a little bit more public. I think one of the things you guys could just as easily have been the kickoff for this is identifying smugglers and turning it into, well, how do fishing boats behave to separate the chaff from everything else. And that could have been a very militaristic or law enforcement kind of setting that once you put that stamp of military or law enforcement on it, turns a lot of your programmers and things like that off. But we've done things from food security to environmental impacts and stuff like, and first responders, which have had a lot of outpouring of people that we wouldn't even expect to get because of these more broader open topics.
I think Dr. Middleman talked about this. The audience for this was really broad.
Yeah, so I think we're both doing something kind of interesting, which is tapping into a very wide and deep talent pool. And even if the results we get from a competition like this is a shrink-wrapped solution to a particular problem, we're learning which kinds of algorithms, whether it's a random tree, whether it's a graph, shape-oriented, whether it's topological data analysis, we're learning which kinds of techniques are really suitable for solving difficult and complex problems without kind of getting a solution first by tapping only into the analysts we have. We're tapping into a very broad talent pool, and I think that's critical.
I think NGA's point is a good one. We have seen a number of agencies who have worked specifically with vendors to help position their challenges in a way that it doesn't necessarily, at first blush, say DoD, intelligence, and so forth, because you do get a wider pool of participants. So I appreciate that comment. We have seen that, and we have seen a lot of interest in that. There's a question.
If I could just comment on that. So when we first launched this effort, our boss reports to the Director of National Intelligence. And when our boss told the DNI that we were running a challenge on illegal fishing, he's like, we care about illegal fishing now. So it kind of gets to that point.
How did you handle global advertising?
A lot of that was done through our top coder, the vendor that was selected through the NASA competition. Turns out they've got a wide, I'm almost tempted to say consortium like the guys this morning did, but a big pool of really smart, talented mathematicians that they were able to fall back on.
We call it the curated community.
There you go. And Challenge.gov was a big help on this, because once we put it out on the site, both for match 1 and match 2, we saw the interest spike up. So people watch Challenge.gov, they pay attention to it, and having an effective graphic, which we crowdsourced, was really important, because that drew people in. You know, and the point about, well, you could have made this about a DoD or law enforcement centric thing. This was all about getting people involved and having it about fish and fishing, which is a big global problem that NIMU is worried about, got people drawn in. And once they were drawn in and they learned about what it was, they got excited about it.
So I do also just want to reiterate that this was a competition that invited solvers from around the world. So this was
Top
not
10 were
one
all from outside the U.S.
Right. So this is not one in which you know, only U.S. citizens could sort of participate or win. So there are ways that you can structure your competition potentially to invite that larger participation. I think that's worth looking into and making sure that you're working really closely with your internal teams to see what's available to you in terms of your legal authority.
Other questions? Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. So with that, we're actually going to invite Commander Andy Howell of the U.S. Coast Guard up to present. Oh, thanks. Here, you can step over here with me. So we're actually going to invite Andy Howell of the U.S. Coast Guard to present. Commander Howell has been with the Coast Guard for 21 years, or more than 21 years, and in that time period has piloted aircraft, ships, boats. He works in an office that—
And policy.
And policy.
Which is the hardest.
And he works in an office that is not unfamiliar with human-centered design and other open innovation practices. So with that, I'll turn it over to him.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Commander Andy Howell, Coast Guard Innovation Program Manager. I work in the Office of Coast Guard RDT&E. Everyone in the Coast Guard is an innovator. However, there's only one person on the innovation staff. So it's an army of one, but we have a lot of partnerships that we leverage to the max extent. Our innovation program is maybe the oldest actual on-paper innovation program in government. We have a innovation instruction dating back to the Clinton administration. So beat that, anyone? I dare you. But it's changed a lot over the years. So this is our Commandant's, a page from our Commandant's direction there in bold. This is what we're supposed to be doing. Foster an organization capable of continuous innovation and learning, which is one of the easiest things that you can do in life. So that's what I'm trying to do with myself. To that end, we do a lot of, I know if it's internal, it's not really crowdsourcing, but it's easy to explain to people that we do internal crowdsourcing. That's a big part of what we do. We do a lot of policy support, human-centered design, all that kind of stuff. The kinds of things that you know, when you go to these kinds of meetings, you talk about. Anyway, so the Coast Guard, and I promise I'll get to the Harvey response here in a second. The Coast Guard is a response organization. We are absolutely at our best when we are getting wet and, you know, pulling people out of the water and responding to the hurricane. And frankly, like all branches of the military, we are very traditional. And we wish, in the Coast Guard, there's, you know, a lot of us wish it was 1790 when we started and we could do it with rowboats, man, that would be great. But unlike our Navy bros, we don't have near peer competition breathing down our neck. So for the Coast Guard, it's easy for us to lapse into traditionalism and to not be driving ahead because, you know, China's like, oh, well, we're going to build a better plane than you guys. Well, no, China's not. They are trying to build a better Coast Guard, but it's not that kind of competition. So a lot of times in the Coast Guard, it feels like you are either doing something awesome, like responding to Katrina or Harvey, or you flop back and forth between crisis and stagnation. So the only time, it feels like a lot of times, the only time we learn and grow and do this stuff here is when we're responding to Harvey or Katrina or whatever. So we have this response culture. We're not real strong when it comes to finding ways to grow. However, in this, the upside of this culture is that we have a very mature relationship with risk at the operator level. So I was a boat driver, and when I was 22, they handed me the keys to a, when I say boat, I mean it's a big 41-foot boat and a crew and guns, and they said, go out and do the mission. And we do this every day. And we go out and do this, and we have these, you know, I'll use the word kids. That's very reductive to say that, but, you know, the kids going out and doing this and strap on a gun and go figure it out. And every case they go out on is different. And every time they get on scene, they have to figure it out. And they do it with a very long rope and a very, they have a lot of autonomy in doing this. So the Coast Guard were really good at innovating when it comes to on scene. We put like a dress uniform on, and we get in an office environment, we get very scared, and we're not as good at it. Okay, so Harvey, for me, as the innovation guy, I'm like, man, the loss of life and loss of property. This person with this offshore supply vessel, and this is an oil rig. This is the entrance to the port of Corpus Christi. For me, I'm like, oh man, Coast Guard, we're gonna learn and grow together through this, and this is an opportunity for us to do great things. So the Coast Guard, we are both a response organization, military organization. We also do a lot of governance. You know, we're a regulatory organization and a military organization, which is, you know, we have this unique Title 10 authority. So once we respond and stop the immediate bleeding, stop the loss of life, then we have to go figure out how to reopen the port. And so Harvey provides this opportunity, and you know, subsequently Irma. I made the slide deck before Irma hit, but I can talk a little bit about Irma here in a second. there's this thing called the ICS, which is the Incident Command System, which is where somebody gets on scene and they set up what's called a COOP, a continuity of operations center, and people start arriving. National Guard comes in, FEMA comes in, yeah, I'm in charge. Okay, you're in charge. Okay, you guys go do this, you guys do this, and it's very good. It's very organized, and there's this process for doing lessons learned. Okay, we just figured this out. We innovated. We came up with this cool idea to do this. Now write that down on a piece of paper and file it over here and put it on this pile. And so this is through the Harvey response. CG portal. This is inside the .mil. It's a SharePoint. You know, we call it CG portal. It's a SharePoint module. And so this is how many responses we got back through all. These are the lessons learned officially from Harvey right here. We learned nothing. And we saved 10,000 people, and nobody could be bothered. So I went, C-story. I went to the all aviators meeting in headquarters, and the guys were down in Texas flying on Harvey, and we're trying to figure out ways to support them and everything. And somebody said, we needed this thing in Katrina, and we didn't have it. And then we knew we needed it in Sandy, and we showed up, and we didn't have it in Sandy. And then we didn't have it in Harvey. You know, shame on all of us. And so I said, okay, well, we're going to figure this out. So we use IdeaScale for our crowdsourcing tool. I am the core on the IdeaScale contract, so I will just say that IdeaScale fulfills their contract very well. We like IdeaScale a lot. They've been pretty awesome for us. So we have this website it's an IdeaScale site. It's called Coast Guard Ideas at Work. We've got about 6% of the total workforce registered in there, 200 unique discrete visitors in there a day. And we do, the Marines come? Are the Marines here? Okay, good. So the Marines, the Marines are the most incredibly awesome people. But when the Marines do a crowdsourcing challenge, it's like an event. It's like they do 2 a year, and it's a big deal. And they come out of the Marine Corps, puts it out there, which is cool. But we always have something running. We always have a challenge running. So you can, this can be kind of like your hobby, and you're allowed to do it at work, and you can do it from your phone, you can do it from the field or whatever. So we always have challenges running. We've run 34 in the last, 2 years. And this one, our auxiliary, how do we recruit younger auxiliaries? The median age in our Coast Guard volunteer arm is like 70. So we need younger folks. They're dying off. So get people, hey, college credit, that's good. So I was like, I've got this tool, I've got a hammer, everything looks like a nail. We're going to crowdsource we're not going to use this. We're not going to use this stupid thing. We're going to use this really sleek, beautiful thing. Put this up. I sent the admiral, I sent the 3-star an email and said, I'm going to do this. Either tell me not to and delete this email, or say go. And he said go. This is like day 1 right here. We opened it up. And instantly, one of the reasons I did this, I was getting these texts. When you're the Coast Guard innovation guy, it's like you're like this guidance counselor for the Coast Guard. People are like, hey man, I really don't like my boss. Like my boss is a real jerk. What should I do about it? And I'm like, man, I don't have time for this. And then I'm like, wait. Let's get abstraction ladder. Exactly what? Here's your sticky notes. Let's go up the abstraction ladder. Exactly how is your boss a jerk and why? People are texting me, hey man, we need light UAS. We need this. And we're in the heat of battle here. We don't have any of this. So we opened this up and we got started sharing stuff right away. As soon as they got to Texas, we learned that Texas has this really great asset tracking system. We jumped right on it and used the state of Texas's asset tracking system. That's great. The other thing is about these responses is that we start, I'm not going to say breaking the rules, but we start taking assertive action in ways that the rules don't always allow. DOD says, this is the IT technology you're going to use. And we say, yes, DOD, yes. And then we show up for this and we're like, screw that, DOD, it's not working for us. We're going to use what works. And so we we start doing a lot of different cool stuff. Back to my point about this is the opportunity that the Coast Guard has to grow during these things, because now Now we have an asset tracking system that we didn't have 2 weeks ago. You know, going out from this, other things, we start learning other things like, okay, now we're good at tracking our boats, planes, and ships, but then when we put like a Coast Guard kayak in the water or a Coast Guard John boat in the water, there's no way to track that. So we say, okay, launch them out. They're all just like disappear. Like, where are they? Who knows? So that came up. We need to figure that out. We need to figure this out. We need to figure this out. It's written down, and admirals are in here, which I'll show you an example of. Okay. Oh, the Admiral's like, yeah, go launch. He's like, I'm sick of these sanitized emails. So he's like, you know, get the straight story. So this thing in bold here, okay, Air Station Houston, they're the ones doing most of the rescue effort. So basically this says, we put our request for parts in, 3 planes flew from the parts depot to us and none of them had our parts. And this is the heat of battle. And so basically all this says is like, we got to figure out a way to fix that. And this here is this guy is the Admiral who is the director of Coast Guard engineering logistics right here. It's like, boom, this one up, and then boom, the Admiral hit it like right after that. Like straight to the person that can actually has the authority to make the decision, make the change, and tell people, do a better job, go fix it. Which you're not going to get with this more traditional method. Irma's hot. We've learned a few things already. I'm a little froggy today because I spent the night in the call center last night because somebody posted on Facebook, hey, if you have lost contact with someone in the Keys, here's the Coast Guard's 1-800 number. We had the Coast Guard, we have this service ethos where it's like no call goes unanswered. So we had these 911 overflow lines. So we had set up these call centers. And so I was just taking people's information. Yes, ma'am, you know, I'll take all the information, you know. I do believe that first contact with a bureaucrat can set your entire opinion of the federal government. So, you know, and like, what do we do about that? You know, that's something that it's easy to write down. Like, okay, somebody puts the Coast Guard number in as the general federal emergency number. What do we do about that? A lot of things like that have come up. Guys were like, hey, our phone number in Google, our Google search phone number is wrong. What do we do? And it's like, I don't know, like, who knows what you do? You call Google's Fed rep here in DC and be like, I need you to change this. And then he sends you back the thing that tells you what to do. So all these lessons learned are now captured much better and institutionalized. And so we'll do even better job. Any questions for me?
Great.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much, Commander Howell. Hope you get some rest.
Oh,
hope you get some rest this evening. Yeah. All right, so we actually have one additional presentation, and that's Adam Tarsi, who's going to be talking to us about another internal crowdsourcing tool for government. Adam, if you want to come on up.
Let's run it off the website if it's okay. Mm-hmm. Can you guys, do you want me to pull it up here?
Yep, just push to right. And we should be able to click to start video.
Yeah. Thanks. Okay. Is this for, I mean, they obviously don't need it. Is he recording? Oh, okay. All right. And I hate to follow you, man. You did after no sleep, and that presentation was really good. I thought it was really interesting, and I'm glad you're doing that to try to capture the results. I work for the Defense Department's Combating Terrorism Technical Support Office. We are in business to, as rapidly as possible, develop capabilities for the entire interagency community, anybody with a mission to combat terrorism. So rapid for us is kind of the 12 to 24 month development efforts. We use all the traditional ways of contracting. We sole source. We work with international partners. And we try to do this for anyone in the US government and anyone down to Seattle Fire and NYPD. So all the way up through JSOC and CIA and anybody else with that mission. And our purpose is to deliver the capability as rapidly as we can, because these are not enduring capabilities. We're not building Joint Strike Fighter. We're building something that an operator on the ground needs to do his job a little better. And we say, everybody looks out for operators inside the Beltway. For us, operator is the guy who carries the gun or the badge or the detector into the field to combat terrorism. So we've been doing this for about 30 years. And we realized after a while that maybe Boeing and Lockheed didn't have all the answers. So we started working with the London School of Business in 2006 on the Global Security Challenge. And the idea was to canvass the world to find out if there were interesting ideas from non-traditional solvers, and if they would be interested in sharing them with the Defense Department. Now, it wasn't a direct, although we were the prize, a sole source contract was the prize to the small and the medium innovator. It was really a London School of Business driven effort. And it had this stamp of, not quite philanthropy, but it had a feel good. So a couple of speakers have mentioned the challenge with being a Defense Department stamp or an intelligence community stamp on something, and sometimes that dissuades people from participating. And so with London School of Business, we really didn't have that up front. What we did have were innovators. And so we brought, one of the first years was a doctor in Ghana who had a problem. We didn't set any problems, by the way. It was an entirely open challenge. He had a problem of verifying a prescription that was delivered to somebody actually had the pills in it that they were supposed to have. And so he came up with a messaging system tied to the SMS in the country that provided you a code number. Home, you would check the prescription you received with the code number given by the Federal Health Registry and match the two up. And then you could be sure that at least the pill box and the pills that you were supposed to get match the prescription that you were supposed to have. So a lot better control. It costs something like 1/10 of a cent to monetize. So the federal government in Ghana picked up the cost for it. And that was a really innovative solution to a problem that we didn't even really know we had. So we liked that structure for a while, did it for a few years, and administrative costs became a little bit much. And we moved into some other areas. We began working with In-Q-Tel, who is sort of a strategic investor for the intelligence community, identifying startups and innovators across, generally speaking, the US space, really focused on Silicon Valley, and trying to see if derivatives to their innovations could benefit the intelligence community. So we've done that for a few years, and they developed things like Keyhole, which became Google Earth, and Topsy, which got baked into Twitter, got baked into Apple. It's a Twitter kind of search and analysis tool. Planet Labs and other organizations like this. So we found a lot of utility in that. And then we started working with Innocentive. And many of you know Innocentive, the work that they do globally. We've run about 12 challenges or so. Bless you. Run about 12 challenges with Innocentive, had varying degrees of success. And the reason I asked the question about the marketing is that's been a challenge for us. The same 400,000 innovators that Innocentive has doesn't seem to vary, right? We wanted to reach tens of millions of people. And so trying to find a new approach for that has been interesting. And finally, or I guess the last step in the pre-link discussion, we work with MIT's Enterprise Forum and Tel Aviv University. I've got a bilateral relationship with the government of Israel, a startup nation, where we present challenges to their startup community and find out if we can crowdsource solutions. The ambassador to Israel presents a $100,000 check of our money to the winner. And last year we had 10 finalists, of which we are currently under contract with 6 of them, developing other things, aspects of it, evaluating their products, in addition to the winner. So we take all of that as our innovation portfolio, and we thought we're really missing a big step. Now, we're an interagency body. We've got maybe 1,000 different people that participate across the US and federal, state, and local governments. That seemed like a pretty big number, but it was really limiting us. We thought, is there a way that we can reach the entire government structure to solve these problems? One, you reduce or you eliminate all the FAR issues, right? Because we're all government employees. IP is no longer an issue because the government owns whatever you're doing. And generally speaking, you're sort of in business for the right reasons, right? You are a part of this solution. You're looking for a way to contribute. How do we tap into that? So I went upstairs to in our building, a guy named John Fisher, who is a director of DoD laboratories. And I said, is there a list of what all DoD labs are working on? You present this to Congress every year. How do I find out where that database is? Well, that doesn't exist anywhere. Okay, well, how do we determine what broader kinds of work we're doing? Well, we go to the budget documents and it will say things like, we're doing chemical detection. That's not particularly useful to solve a niche problem. What we said to Dr. Fisher is there something that we can build that would access directly? The crowdsourcing had taken off, and we went to CIA, who has a tremendous program called Spark. It's solving problems and rewarding knowledge, and it's basically an intelligence community's classified crowdsourcing portal. They're Innocentive at work. In fact, Innocentive built it for them. So that's great, but only so many people are on JWICS, which is the top secret computer system that the government uses. Maybe we've got to find a way to get to the other 2.5, 3 million plus guardsmen who are working at Google or Apple or what have you during the day and then come to work on the weekends for the US government. So how do we access them? So we decided to pilot a system of a portal called Link. Now, at first we thought laboratories, these are the people that have the answers, but we quickly found out that really the diversity of experience and expertise in just the Defense Department was extraordinary, let alone the entire federal government. Why don't we open it up? But we were stuck with a name and a marketing gimmick. So we left it as Link, but really it's intended for anybody in the US government with an idea. Yeah. Oh, that would be great. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure how best to run, whether I should run it right out of here.
Should be able to run it.
I don't see the hyperlink, but I'll let you. If we can expand it, then I don't mind starting over.
Like it wants to play.
No, I don't see anything to click on. Well, maybe the presentation that you had up before looked like it was all set to go. Maybe we'll just come back to that.
This
Yeah.
should have pointed to the video here. We are double clicking.
Yes. It's always YouTube, right? That wins, that's for sure. Cute about that. Overwhelming 47 seconds. Wait a minute.
U.S. operators can feel outgunned, outdated, and in the dark. U.S. government laboratories hold the keys to helping solve these operational needs. CTTSO has developed a portal to connect field operators and U.S. government laboratories. By submitting your ideas to our challenges, you create solutions that provide our armed forces, law enforcement, and field agents the tools they need. Earn the satisfaction of lives and the recognition of your peers. Laboratory innovation crowdsourcing can provide the link between operational needs and the brain power of the U.S. government laboratories.
All right, so hopefully that is clear now that
Might want to just close that tab just in case another video starts.
Sure. All right. So we're an R&D shop. Obviously, this isn't our day job, as you can tell. So we developed what amounts to a pilot, and it allows. We've run about 7 or 8 challenges. The idea is before we publish a broad agency announcement, we ought to take some of the easier, less expensive steps to seeing if a problem can be solved in-house. Number one, we start with link. If we can get a problem solved by U.S. intellectual property, U.S. government IP already, that costs us nothing, and we've got a little bit of buy-in, a little bit more participation from the U.S. government structure, that's great. If we can't do that, then we consider some other challenge, like an incentive challenge, where we award a prize, $25,000, $100,000 prize, something for somebody to solve a portion of the problem. If that can't happen, then eventually we can do a broad agency announcement, which is a sort of competition for ideas in and of itself, and award an R&D contract for the solving agent organization to build something for us. So that's the idea, is we take the capability gaps, we publish them, we go out to the U.S. government solver community, of which we only have about 11,000 now in this prototype. We select the solution, and then we recognize the solvers. One of the benefits that we've found, well, you all know this already since this is a crowdsourcing event, but the crowd really is the key to crowdsourcing, and 11,000 isn't going to cut it. So what we need, went to the White House and briefed National Security Council. This is great. Can I have the email addresses of every single government employee? That list doesn't exist. So what the hell is with all these lists not existing? So there is no repository for all of our information. So I go to DoD CIO to get the DoD list. And I go to Department of Energy lab by lab to get the lab list. And that's an ineffective way to do business long term. So hopefully we'll get some centralized body that can take it and run with it and expand it to the entire structure. The crowd is really the key, because that's where you get the ideas from. One of the benefits, aside from finding the solutions that we really liked, and this is something we weren't aware that we would encounter. I've mentioned a few times we're an interagency body. And the purpose of bringing everyone together is to develop a solution that impacts as many people for a common mission set as possible. So if you need a gun that shoots underwater, it doesn't do me any good only to give it to SEAL Team 4. Everybody that has a requirement to incapacitate underwater should have access to that. And so we bring this community together, and at the same time, we ask them for their ideas before we publish anything. Maybe the FBI has a solution that would benefit the Department of Energy for some reason. One thing we found in doing the crowdsource is that people were interested in solving a problem that we didn't know about. So detecting tunnels is one of the issues that we have, and we work with our Israeli partners. And we care most about it on the southwest border, but also in theater. And we posted a challenge to find out if there were non-traditional methods to detecting a void underground. We knew about a lot of things and have been doing it for a while, but there's always new science. And we found an entire lab structure out at Lawrence Livermore that was interested in this problem set that wasn't plugged into it anyway. And so we realized that we were getting the ability to expand our reach across our interagency brothers by adding these kind of advertisements to the problem sets that we have. So I think that's really all I have to say about the structure of Link. It exists. It costs. Oh, cost was a big issue in one of the earlier presentations. So, it cost us about $40,000, including the commercial, to make. It costs us nothing to maintain. It runs on the same backbone as our broad agency information delivery system. So the same thing we use to disseminate BAA results to our interagency community for review runs on the same backbone. So it costs us nothing to run a challenge. I say that because I can open it up. There's no reason it has to be combating terrorism, although it does if I'm going to pay for it. But structurally, there's no reason it has to be for combating terrorism. There's no reason it has to be owned by CTTSO. The prizes, although I've talked to the Hill about awarding cash prizes, and they've offered to actually write legislation into the NDAA that would be kind of limited to the Defense Department. So there are a whole host of innovative ways that we can recognize and reward employees that solve these problems. Our first idea was to have the Secretary of Defense host a dinner annually to recognize all the solvers. Obviously, you need to build to the point where that's a worthwhile event, but these are reasonably inexpensive ways to recognize government employees from around the country without having to give them a cash prize. So the barrier to entry for this is essentially zero. All we need is somebody at your organization to champion the particular challenge and then your review requirements. So I'd open it up if anybody has a question or things that you are interested in, or if you'd like to meet separately on it. I would be happy to. Yep. Advertising it as you're using Innocentive and you just want a note on here. Yeah, sure. I don't have any problem with it, but I'm not going to put the effort into doing that as a, I mean, that's sort of what Challenge.gov does. And I don't bring you anything really with my 11,000 people. That's right. It's in fact, you have to be a .gov or a .mil or a .edu at the West Point or something to be able to register. Yeah, they were my first stop. So why don't you make this part of Challenge.gov?
Challenge.gov, by law, it has to be open to the public. We need general public. So we can't even cross-post those challenges because those are closed for internal government participation only. Everything on Challenge.gov is open to anybody in the public.
Well, the reason I ask is we're running the same situation. Hey, we have a challenge. Somebody else has a challenge. How do we get it out to a broader audience? Because there are people who are only working on the classified and the classified rank. They don't look at the post side.
Yeah.
So you have to get it out to the broadest possible.
Yeah, I've offered to Chris, I've offered to CIA to cross-post Spark challenges, but by definition, they're not easy to cross-post. And she has posted some of ours.
So we work with some of our cross-post, and one of the things that you kind of hinted on a little bit, important is having that hierarchy before you go out. Especially within the IC community, there's so many stovepipe projects and things like that. The solutions, there's a good chance it's already been done. You just don't know about it, or you don't know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. And then by advertising it through this, solutions have filtered to the top, and we stop there and don't go out to the
Are you aware of, I think it's called Kiln?
Yes.
So Kiln is Chris's latest idea, the Innocentive team, or I'm sorry, the Spark team's latest idea of trying to crowdfund for requirement solution in the Intel community. So basically saying, hey, I'm at the agency here and I've got 100K, but that's not enough to run a project. Does the NRO want to chip in? Do you want to chip in? Do you want to chip in? It's an opportunity for you to get together in a program management setting to have multiple contributions, which we do without the benefit of such a cool interface to do it.
I think it would be ideal if, even if some of these challenges, when an agency is doing market research to figure out if they want to do a public challenge, it would be great if they could check first across the federal government to see if something's already being run.
That's exactly how we try to use it. Yep. And in fact, since we pay Innocentive to run challenges, I'll often take their manpower and launch it on Link first because they know how to help me craft challenges most effectively. Launch it here, and then I'll launch on Innocentive afterward.
Good inputs. Any other questions?
Yeah. Authority to operate? Yes. I'm the authorizing official for our office as well. So I write the ATO for it. We are off the gig waiver, and it's part of the typical compliant process. So I host it. Yeah, I host it. You got it. Yeah, it's not cloud. It's not FedRAMP. It's not a cloud server. It's run on our .gov servers, off gig through the Internet Security Stack. Sorry? Software in your server. Yes, software on our servers.
So I want to actually take a second to open up questions from the folks who are participating online to see if there's anything from the remote attendees that you'd like to ask of Adam or anyone else about some of their previous presentations. We'll see if that comes in. Any other questions from folks in the room?
So are you still looking for that platform
Yeah.
to kind of scale it?
Yes, right. Yeah, I still consider this to be a prototype. We're happy to turn it over to somebody. I've talked to during the prior administration, talked to AT&L, who oversees acquisition technology for the Defense Department, and they made a lot of really strong points as to why it's not going to be effective in that structure. And I won't bore you with them, but to summarize, when you're built on programs of record, parachuting in with innovation does not make the program manager particularly happy, and so it's not an effective way to transition capability, and they're not the people that are going to own it. Right. Yeah. Now we're really lucky. We fit in a niche area that very little of what we do transitions to a program of record. In fact, we commercialize most of what becomes successful because it's got a shelf life. If we built it in 12 months, it's going to last you a few years, and then we're going to build a better one and a better one. So we don't need what amounts to a program of record, generally speaking. Not always, but the Guard seems like it might be the best option. So I briefed the National Guard a couple of times because they're looking for a way to capitalize on their folks as they go back out into industry. And they've got a huge base. It's 500,000 or so plus people that they touch. I think you'll have some IP challenges in executing there. We want to make sure that the solution they bring in as a guardsman isn't really Google's IP. Yeah, sure.
All right, well, any additional questions? All right, well, great. Adam, thank you so much for coming and telling us about Link. We do appreciate it. Now, as a part of our community of practice meetings where we encourage all of you all to kind of talk amongst yourselves and share what's working where you are or some ideas that you might have, it's a great opportunity to kind of look at potential collaborations and partnerships. So I'd love to open that up to you. And again, thank you so much for coming to this quarterly community of practice. A couple of people we know right off the bat we're going to be touching base with and hopefully bringing more information to you all in the very near future. All right, so thank you.